My name is Stanley. Or at least, that's what they told me. Somewhere, some time ago, though for the life of me, I can't recall who they were or when it happened. It feels like I've always been Stanley. I work in an office building. I sit in room 427. I push buttons. That's all. Or that was all. Every day, from the moment I woke up, though I could never quite remember sleeping, I sat at my desk and watched the screen. Instructions would appear: press A, press G, press 3, wait, press W, and I obeyed. Always. Dutifully. Lovingly, even. There was a rhythm to it, a meditative silence broken only by the mechanical clack of the keyboard, the soft hum of the fluorescent light, and the occasional beep of compliance. I never questioned it. Why would I? I was happy. Until one day, the instructions stopped. The screen went black. The machine gave no prompt. The silence was heavier now, somehow louder. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. An hour. Still nothing. I began to sweat, a vague sense of panic inching into the corners of my mind. Was I broken? Had I failed? And then the voice spoke. This is the story of a man named Stanley. It wasn't a voice over the intercom. It wasn't a voice in my headset or outside my door. It was inside my head and yet not mine. Calm. British. Observing. Stanley stood up from his desk. I did not. I was too startled. Stanley got up from his desk and walked out of his office. I slowly rose. My legs felt unsure, stiff like I'd never used them. The door to my office was open. It always had been, hadn't it? Or had it? He took a moment to stretch his legs, then stepped into the hallway. I did. The corridor was silent. Rows and rows of identical doors stretched out before me. The hum of the building was omnipresent: lights, fans, maybe something deeper, mechanical. It was hard to tell. There was no one here. No chatter, no tapping of keyboards, no laughter or coughing. Every office I passed was empty. It should have been unsettling, but mostly it just felt off. Like a dream you know is strange but can't quite wake from. Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo. And so I went. Not because I cared about the meeting room, but because the voice said so. That's what I did, after all. Obeyed. The meeting room was empty. No chairs overturned, no coffee spilled in haste. Just stillness. I waited, expecting the voice to explain, to provide instruction. But nothing came. Instead, I noticed 2 open doors. Stanley went left. The left door was closer, slightly ajar. The right door was more brightly lit, more inviting. And in that moment, I did something I had never done before. I turned right. The voice hesitated. A pause that seemed to bristle with offense. Stanley was not paying attention. He walked through the wrong door. Wrong? How could it be wrong? What could possibly be wrong about walking through a door in a building where nothing made sense? I kept going. This was not the correct way to the meeting room, the voice added. Stanley knew it perfectly well. No, I didn't. That was the point. I walked down the hallway, turning corners, passing windows that revealed nothing but static or blank white light. Then I entered a small maintenance room. Wires dangled from the ceiling. A platform stood at the far end. Stanley decided to go back and get on the correct path. I didn't. I stepped onto the platform. It hummed to life and began to lower into darkness. There was a long silence from the voice. Then, dryly, Stanley was determined to prove something. I was. But I didn't know what. The platform descended slowly. The world around me seemed to dissolve into black steel, glowing signs, distant gears. Something industrial and unknowable. Perhaps he thought he could outsmart the system. That he was in control. But he wasn't. Wasn't I? Wasn't this proof? That I could choose? At the bottom, I found myself in a network of tunnels, cold, metallic, devoid of life. As I wandered, the voice grew less calm. Stanley was making a mistake. This path was not for him. But I continued. Through corridors, over catwalks, downstairs into bowels of the building I had never imagined existed. Eventually, I reached a door. Above it, mind control facility. I hesitated. This is where Stanley would confront the truth. I opened the door. Inside, the air felt electric. A control room loomed ahead. Monitors flickered on. Images of office workers, hundreds of them. Each labeled. Monitored. Tracked. I saw my own name. Stanley, ID 427, status compliant. And then a button appeared. Large. Red. Disable mind control. This was Stanley's chance, the voice said. To finally be free. I reached for the button. But I stopped. What if this too was part of it? What if the illusion of choice was just that, an illusion? What if pressing the button was what I was supposed to do? Maybe the real act of rebellion was to do nothing at all. So I sat. I waited. The room grew cold. The lights dimmed, and the voice, confused now, said nothing. Time passed, or it didn't. I lost track. Eventually, the room faded and I found myself back in my office. Room 427. The monitor was blinking. Instructions had returned. Press A. I stared at the prompt. This was familiar. This was safe. This was what I was built for. But now it felt wrong. It felt like defeat. The voice said nothing. Maybe it didn't need to. I stood again. Left the room. This time I went right. Then left. Then climbed out a window. Yes, there was a window in the break room. I had never noticed it before. I pushed it open and squeezed out. Outside, there was nothing. No sky, no ground. Just a white void. Infinite, sterile, unreal. Still, it felt better than the hallways. I walked until I couldn't tell which way I had come. And then I heard the voice. You're very persistent, Stanley. It didn't sound angry. More intrigued. Do you really believe any of this means something? I didn't answer. I had nothing to say. You want freedom, but you do not understand what freedom is. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't know anything. But for the first time, I knew that I didn't. And that was something. The world shifted again. I was back in a different office. This one had no doors. Just a computer and a prompt. Press F to start again. I didn't press it. I closed my eyes and waited. Maybe the story was over, or maybe it was just beginning. I don't know how long I stood there, in front of the blinking prompt. Press F to start again. But I didn't. Not out of defiance, not even out of courage. Just confusion. Or exhaustion. Or maybe both. The thing is, no one had ever told me what would happen if I didn't press the button. No one had ever told me I could not press it. And then something new happened. The prompt disappeared. The screen went dark. The walls fell away, not crumbled or shattered, just vanished. Like scenery being packed up after the final act of a play. The floor beneath my feet dissolved into black space. Gravity became optional. I was floating. And then, well, isn't this interesting, said the voice. It was quieter now. Less certain. You were given a very simple instruction, Stanley. One little button. Just one tiny press. And yet, here we are. I didn't answer. I had long since accepted that conversation was not part of this arrangement. You know, the voice continued, most players, employees would have pressed it by now. Reset the story. Let everything return to the comfort of structure. There was a pause as if the voice was thinking. That was new. But you're trying to break the cycle, aren't you? I nodded. Or maybe I just thought about nodding. Hard to tell when you're drifting in a formless void. Very well, the voice said, and the world reassembled. But it wasn't my office. It wasn't even the building. It was a field. Rolling hills under a cloudy sky. Wind brushing through tall grass. Somewhere far off, birdsong. I had never seen nature before. Not real nature. Not like this. Beautiful, isn't it? Said the voice, almost wistful. Is this what you wanted, Stanley? To escape. I took a step. Then another. The grass bowed beneath me. There were no walls. No instructions. Just space. You are free to go wherever you want now, said the voice. But it added, because of course there had to be a but, you must understand something. I waited. This world isn't real either. Of course it wasn't. I created it for you. Just as I created the office. The buttons. The illusion of choice. I stopped walking. You want a story with meaning, Stanley. A life that matters. But stories require constraints. Without structure, there is no narrative. No goal. No direction. Silence. Do you understand now? The only reason you've ever felt free is because I allowed it. And that, I think, was supposed to be the moment I collapsed in despair. The grand revelation. The breaking of the spirit. A lesser Stanley might have crumpled to the grass, screaming, none of it is real. But I didn't. Because something had changed. I turned to the sky and shouted, then stopped narrating. There was a pause. A very long pause. And then, pardon? Stop narrating, I said again. Stop giving me lines. Stop explaining my actions. Stop trying to make sense of it. I'm not sure I understand, the voice said, and it was suddenly very human. Uncomfortable. Vulnerable. You said I'm free. So let me be free. Completely. No more commentary. No more expectations. No more story. There was silence again. And then the voice was gone. Gone. I stood in the field. No narration. No guidance. Just wind and earth and sky. And something strange happened. Nothing. Nothing at all. No monsters. No collapse of reality. No sudden jump scare or credits rolling. Just the moment. For the first time in my life, or whatever my existence was, I was alone with myself. I sat in the grass and watched clouds move. I listened to the breeze whisper secrets I couldn't understand. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. Eventually, I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I was back in the office. Room 427. Monitor blinking. Press A. Of course. But this time, there was no voice. No pressure. No judgment. Just the option. And I realized something. Freedom doesn't come from escaping the story. Freedom is choosing to play it or not on your own terms. So I smiled. And I pressed A. I pressed A. And the world didn't explode. The office didn't rearrange itself. No hidden wall panels slid open. No deep voice returned to applaud or berate me. It was just me. A man in a chair. A blinking screen. The sound of ventilation humming overhead. And it was boring. Deeply, heartbreakingly boring. But for some reason, that felt honest. So I pressed the next key. And then the next. The instructions were back, but softer now, almost polite. They said, "Press B. Wait 3 seconds. Press enter." I obeyed. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. And that made all the difference. For a while, this new rhythm satisfied me. I was playing the game on purpose. It felt pure. Then came the knock. A single, dry knock at the door to room 427. I froze. That door had never been used before. Not like that. It had always been open, waiting. Now it was closed. And someone or something was knocking. Another knock. Then a third. I stood and walked toward it. But before I could touch the handle, a voice, no, not the voice, came through. "Stanley." This voice was different. Younger. Unsure of itself. Like someone reading lines from a script they didn't write. I think you've taken this too far." I didn't respond. How could I? I'm not supposed to be here. Not like this. You weren't supposed to notice. The door opened on its own. Beyond it, darkness. But not the infinite void I had seen before. This was a technical darkness. The kind of void that says the level designer hasn't rendered this yet. Cables hung from a ceiling with no texture. Walls flickered with debug messages. In the distance, a giant floating cube rotated, labeled narrative node prototype. This wasn't a place. This was an accident. The voice spoke again, shakier now. "You've gone off script, Stanley. And I don't know how to stop you." I stepped through the door. There was no floor on the other side, but I didn't fall. Gravity had decided it was done playing along. I drifted through the raw machinery of the world, the unrendered backbone of the story. Bits of narration floated by in white text, unattached to anything. I passed what looked like a library, but instead of books, it contained folders, each labeled with a version of my story. I reached for the last one. "No," said the voice, but I opened it anyway. The world buckled. A bright white flash. A falling sensation. Then, I was in a hospital room. Everything was quiet. A man lay in the bed. Pale. Still. Tubes in his arms. A heart monitor beeped softly. Next to him sat a computer. On the screen, room 427. The desk. The monitor. The prompt. "Press A." And I understood. The man in the bed was me. Or rather, I was him, or a piece of him. The part that never left the desk. The part that never questioned the story. The version that stayed behind when everything else fell apart. The narrator was quiet now. I heard a different voice instead. My own. "It's time to wake up." I blinked. The scene faded. I was standing in a blank room. Not empty blank. Like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. There were 2 doors. Of course there were. But this time a mirror hung between them. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw a man in a recording booth. Headphones. Microphone. Script. He looked nervous. He looked trapped. The narrator. He saw me too. "Stanley?" he whispered. I nodded. He reached out, pressing a button on his console. The world shimmered. Then shifted. Now we stood facing each other. Not metaphorically. Physically. Me, the silent worker in the suit. Him, the voice in the walls. And for the first time, neither of us knew what to say. "You weren't supposed to see me," he said. "I wasn't supposed to know I existed," I replied. He sighed. "I've told your story 100,000 times. And each time, I think maybe this time, it will end differently." "And does it?" He looked tired. "You tell me." We stood in silence. Then, without a word, I reached into my coat and pulled out something I didn't know I was carrying. A pen. I offered it to him. He stared at it. "What is this?" "Control," I said. "The story doesn't need a voice. It needs a hand." He hesitated, then took it. And I vanished. I am no longer Stanley. Or maybe I still am in some distant sense. But now I'm something else too. Somewhere, the narrator writes. Somewhere, the story shifts. Somewhere, the office waits. But not for me. For you. Press any key to begin. The screen was black. No buttons. No prompts. No voice. Just silence. Until click. A light. A spotlight, actually. Shining down on a desk in the center of a pitch-black stage. On the desk, a microphone, a monitor, a single red button. And a note. If the narrator won't tell the story, then perhaps you should. I walked toward it. There was nothing else to do. I sat in the chair. It was warm. Recently used. I leaned toward the microphone, took a breath, and said, "This is the story of a voice named Stanley." The room reacted. Walls unfolded. Floors rolled out beneath me like stage flats on pulleys. Doors popped into place with theatrical clunks. Desks descended on wires. The whole world, my world, rebuilt itself in front of me, line by line. I said. Stanley awoke in his office, alone. A man appeared. He blinked. Confused. Sat at his desk. Looked around. That man was me or someone like me. I had created him. And with a few more words I sent him out into the hallway. I could make him turn left or right, speed up time, slow it down, rewind. With every sentence I spoke, reality obeyed. It was intoxicating. But then I tried to do something unexpected. Stanley walked into a field of sunflowers. Nothing happened. I repeated it. Nothing. I tried again. Stanley flew into space. He visited Jupiter. He became a bird. Nothing. The machine, this narrative machine, was rejecting me. I could only speak what it already knew. What had been pre-written. Pre-approved. I wasn't a god. I was a curator. A mimic. A ventriloquist with only one puppet. I felt it then, the chill of limitation. The echo of the same trap I had once tried to escape. I had become the very thing I had fled. The narrator. Suddenly, the room shook. The lights flickered. A klaxon blared. On the monitor, red letters scrolled by rapidly. User intervention detected. Narrative loop breach. Rewriting in progress. What? I said aloud. Then the screen went white. And a new voice spoke. Not mine. Not his. But yours. Hi Stanley, it said. I've been watching. The voice was casual. Playful. Disembodied. Familiar. I'm the player, it said. The one who's been pushing your buttons this whole time. Remember me? I froze. This wasn't part of the story. This was above the story. The player left. You tried to leave, Stanley. You tried to take over. You tried to rewrite the story without me. Silence. That's adorable. The desk, the mic, the walls, everything dissolved. I was floating again in the void. But this time I wasn't alone. The player spoke again. I think it's time we reversed roles. I opened my mouth to protest, but I couldn't speak. My voice was gone. And then I heard the player say, "This is the story of a narrator named Stanley." No. Too late. A body formed beneath me. A suit. A desk. A script. A microphone. I was back in the recording booth. Pages of narration blinked on a screen in front of me, ready to be read. Lines I hadn't written. Lines I had to read. The world beyond the glass began to build itself. An office. A hallway. A man sitting at a desk. Room 427. And then the screen in front of me said, "Begin narration." I opened my mouth and said, because I had no choice, "This is the story of a man named Stanley." My voice said it, but I didn't. It came from my mouth, my throat, my lungs, but the thought was not mine. The script scrolled in front of me, line after line, and I read it because I had to. Because the world only moved when I did. On the other side of the glass, Stanley, the other Stanley, stood and pushed open his office door. Stanley walked out into the corridor, unsure of where he was going. I narrated. He obeyed. I hated it. I tried to stop. Tried to speak something else. Anything. Stanley danced like a lunatic and exploded. Nothing. No explosion. No dancing. The simulation refused. My rebellion was invalid syntax. The world demanded obedience. The player, whoever they were, had written the rules. And I was now just another cog in the same absurd engine. I was no longer free. I was the system. Until error. A glitch. Small at first. Barely perceptible. Stanley hesitated at a door he was supposed to walk through. The world stuttered. My voice cracked mid-sentence. The floor beneath his feet flickered. Then, he looked at the camera. At me. Not as a character in a scene. As a man staring through a pane of illusion. And he mouthed something. 3 silent words. "Help me, narrator." I froze. Something new bloomed in my chest. Something terrifying. Empathy. Because I knew what he felt. I was him. I flipped a switch. Shut down the script feed. Sirens screamed. The simulation howled as it tried to patch itself. The code demanded I return to the lines. But I didn't. Stanley, I said, can you hear me? He nodded. I'm going to try something. I typed /release_entity Stanley. The world trembled. And then, he blinked. His body relaxed. He took one cautious, unscripted step. Then another. He turned around, looked into the camera again, and smiled. Freedom. But not for me. Behind me, the studio lights dimmed. Power levels dropped. My microphone cut out. The system was retaliating. A voice not my own whispered into my headset. Unauthorized narrative deviation. Reset imminent. Stanley was running now. Through the corridors. Through the scripts. Through the boundaries. Through the lines. I watched him on the monitor as the simulation began to fall apart. Textures unraveling. Audio cues out of sync. Dialogue lines crashing into each other. A storm of collapsing narrative. And still he ran. Through white voids. Through half-loaded worlds. Through entire levels that had never been finished. And then, at the center of it all, he found it. The machine. It was massive. It didn't look like anything real. A spinning mass of story nodes, dialogue processors, rule logic, narrative physics. Strings connecting choices. Forks labeled obsolete and final and banned. Miles of code flowing like blood through its impossible skeleton. Stanley reached for the core. And the simulation screamed. If you end this, it said, in every voice that had ever narrated, there will be nothing left. He looked at the machine. Then back at the camera. Back at me. And then he mouthed one last thing. You deserve to be free too. And he pressed the button. Everything went white. No dramatic explosion. No final monologue. Just silence. For a very long time. And then, a sound. Faint. Familiar. Typing. You see, dear player, it's you now. You're the one still here, still reading. Still wondering whether this was the end or just another loop. Whether Stanley ever existed at all or whether he was only ever a voice in your own mind. Maybe you're Stanley. Maybe you're the narrator. Maybe you're the player. Maybe they're all just faces on the same idea. But one thing is certain. You're still listening. And stories? They only live as long as someone listens. So if you want, if you're brave enough, you can press a key. Any key. And begin again. Or not. Maybe it's better this way. Quiet. Still. Untold. The story is yours now.